Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Republicans always believe they're just one more pander away from winning a traditional Democrat voting bloc, whether it be young people, Hispanics, or black voters. And yes, the polls showed that President Trump is doing better with those groups than previous Republican candidates have. And so there's this idea that Trump can take those votes away from Biden and coast to victory, putting aside for the moment issues of election integrity. But even that ignores a few glaring issues, and that we've heard this pipe dream before and it's never materialized. Not to say that it'll never be the case one day and that we shouldn't be aiming for it, because we should be. I'm literally married to a Latino man who's half Mexican, and he's as American and conservative as they come. And there are far more like him than the left would ever let on. But at the same time, that doesn't scale up indefinitely into a winning coalition for the right at this moment. I only mean to say that in chasing the specter, what the right ends up doing is ignoring the one voting bloc that it actually has a proven track record of being able to win and to mobilize come election day, and that's the white working class. As our next guest tonight argues over at Substack, quote, "It's obviously not a bad thing that some Hispanic populations across the country are trending toward the GOP. Any political party should want more voters, not fewer. But the reporting around these trends is overstating Hispanic support for Republicans. The GOP's increasing Hispanic support also presents a few issues. In most of the states that will likely determine the outcome of the election, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, the Hispanic vote isn't as important as the white working class vote. So will the Republican Party's courting of Hispanic voters compromise its efforts to regain white working class voters or suburban voters it lost in 2020? For now, the Trump campaign and the Republican Party should avoid any broad national strategy toward Hispanic voters. Instead, they should view and treat Hispanic voters differently on a state-by-state basis. For example, the Trump campaign shouldn't view and treat Hispanics in Arizona the same way it would treat Hispanics in Florida. Republicans should also realize that, regardless of what efforts are spent trying to court Hispanic voters, in most states and congressional districts, Democrats will dominate the Hispanic vote. Republicans should identify those areas now and redirect resources elsewhere," end quote. That's a sensible approach in understanding the complex dynamics at play here electorally, and in understanding that Hispanic voters are not a monolithic bloc, as the left understands them through the prism of collectivism or identity politics. But too many Republicans tacitly accept the left's framing of race relations in this country, and so they're afraid to embrace their natural voters, and instead would rather risk spurning them or alienating them by offering them nothing in order to chase an elusive voting bloc that already has their wants and desires promised to them by Democrats in a way Republicans could never match. In short, if we are going to court new voters, it shouldn't be at the expense of losing our own voters by not catering to their needs, because then in the end, we'll probably end up with neither. Joining us now to discuss more about his article is conservative writer and media strategist Eduardo Naret. He's also the author of Naret Files on Substack and is a former producer for Tucker Carlson when he was with Fox News. Eduardo, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me. You hit the nail on the head. You summarized my piece really well, so thanks for having me on.
No, I really do appreciate it. And like I said, your piece, it's great. There's so much to it that is so important. So the white working class, it's so important to Republicans achieving electoral success. Trump got it in 2016, but it started to flag in 2020, like you said, also alongside suburban voters. So why is the right so afraid to talk about their own voters? I mean, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, he went off to Oxford a few months ago, and he was embarrassed about the whiteness of his party. He said it doesn't look like America, that Democrats look like America. So why does the right keep spurning its own voting base?
Well, I think one thing is a misunderstanding of the numbers. So, for example, if you look at some of the latest polls that you talked about, for example, in the New York Times Siena poll for March, it shows Trump up 6 points over Biden with Hispanics. And I think to the average person, even sadly, some folks and strategists at the RNC is they hear, oh, 6% better with Hispanics, six points. That's a lot, right? Compared to, well, if we lose 1 to 2% of the white vote, 6 is better than 2. But would you rather have 6% of $100 or 2% of $10,000? So it's just simple math here, and especially when it comes to the swing states. So people are talking about the Hispanic vote surging to the right, and that's true in states that are already Republican, for example, like Florida and Texas. That doesn't really do much for Trump. I mean, he's going to win those states anyway. He needs Georgia. He needs Arizona. He needs potentially Nevada. So, unless the Hispanic vote is trending red in those states, which it's not, as an example, in Arizona, Biden actually increased Hillary's lead among Hispanics by about 3 or 4 points. Unless it's happening in those states, it's really not worth it to Trump. It's not of any importance. It's not going to win him the election.
And of course, you hear a lot of, and I know this can be a sensitive topic, so I'm trying to choose my words here delicately, but sometimes you hear some cope from Republicans. You say, well, even if we have the mass amnesties and the rest, and you have the mass immigration through the southern border, both legal and illegal mass immigration, and that, at least the Hispanics coming over by the millions and the millions. And like I said, I've married into a Hispanic family, so I know it can be sensitive for some people to talk about, but you hear a lot of cope from the right, and they go, well, actually, this actually might not just help Democrats. This could help us because, and you address this in your article, the Hispanics are naturally Republican, naturally conservative, especially on social issues. That's at least what we're told. But can you break down for us why that's not exactly the case?
For sure, it's a myth. It's one of many myths. The late great Charles Krauthammer, who I liked and respected, he once wrote that Hispanics were natural Republicans. He said they were religious. On the issue of abortion, they would naturally vote Republican. But almost on all of those counts, he was wrong. And the problem is not that Charles had that opinion. It's that so many adopted that opinion. And so, as an example, let's take the issue of abortion. The 2022 midterms in some states, Hispanics in upwards of 70% said that they wanted to vote for a candidate who was going to protect abortion rights. In states like Arizona right now, just last month, there was a poll that showed 75% of Hispanics wanted to vote for someone who was going to make abortion more accessible. So on this question of, even in Texas, by the way, and even among Cubans are often talked about as the most conservative Hispanic voting bloc. 60% of them, according to Pew Research, believe abortion should be legal in all cases. So, that's not true on the issue of abortion. Let's take the issue of religion. Again, I think people have this idea of Hispanics as very religious people, and that may be true as Catholic people. But what I found in my research that was so interesting was, among favorability ratings for Joe Biden, the single demographic across age groups, different Hispanic races, different Hispanic nationalities, the number one group among which he had the highest favorability was among Catholics. Catholic Hispanics support Joe Biden more than any other Hispanic group. So there are a lot of myths here, and I think the myths come down to who Hispanics are in this country, right? So I mentioned the Cuban American vote. This is a small percentage of the overall Hispanic population in the country, yet it is one that the Republican Party messages to, I think, too much. So they look at Cubans, they look at the issue of socialism. Many Cubans in this country are here because they fled Castro's socialist regime, and I think the Republican Party says, hey, if we message to these voters on socialism, and how the Democratic Party is embracing socialism, they'll vote for us. And sure, that's worked in Florida. But how many Cubans are there in California? How many Cubans are there in Arizona and Texas? Not a lot. I mean, again, Cubans are less than 5% of the entire Hispanic population in the country. And so the most populous group are Mexican Americans. I wouldn't say Mexican Americans are very opposed to socialism. You look at the president that they have in that country, and Mexicans have been a solid Democrat voting bloc for decades. I mean, Mexicans vote for Democrats in upward of 65% typically every election. So again, I think that's another example of where the Republican strategists in Washington just don't understand who Hispanics are and what issues they care about.
And it leads us into the issue of pandering. I mean, we joke about the left's pandering, right? It's very obvious and it's just over and awkward and cringe. But the right does it too. And I mean, the GOP does it. I remember back during the COVID days when Biden was in office, back during his early days, and the GOP was trying to message to women. And so what they were trying to say is, can you believe Biden's kept all these women at home and that women need to get back to work? They've been hurt more than anybody by all the closures. And I thought, well, actually, a lot of women like being home. They like being home with their kids, and they wanted more flexible work hours, actually. They didn't want to be stuck 9 to 5. Not saying that women in total didn't want to work anymore, but they wanted more flexible hours to be with their kids. But also the GOP saying, women, you don't belong with your children. Get back out there and make me a sandwich at Subway because now you're getting paid for it. So the pandering can get awkward. I know also President Trump in his 2020 re-election bid, there was the criminal justice reform that ended up letting out some bad criminals. There was the platinum plan of like $500 billion in black capital. But I mean, the left does that all the time, and that's what we would call DEI. It just on and on. You kind of see this cringe pandering, and it really dilutes the right's messaging. You'll see the right trot out even transgender individuals and say, but this one's the cool type because they like the GOP, and so somehow we're going to throw our morals out the window. So do you see some of this pandering as well as being an issue that it undermines what we even stand for as a party?
Totally. The one thing I will give Trump credit for and his campaign credit for is they actually haven't softened on the immigration message. So I have problems with Trump with how he carried out what his promises were in 2016 throughout his presidency. He didn't fulfill a lot of them in terms of building the wall and deporting illegals. But I will give him credit in that he hasn't softened that now. I mean, he knows he has to win in 2024. It's not like he's going out there saying, oh, I'm going to grant amnesty and all this stuff. If anything, he has amped up the immigration rhetoric. And I think it's important to do that because, again, on every single, I touched upon abortion and the issue of faith, but I also talk about in my article, too, how even on the issue of border security, even among Hispanics who say that they're Republican, I mean, they are way to the left of your average Republican voter, of your average white voter on the issues of border security, on issues of the asylum process we see going on at the border right now. Even on the issue of free speech, over 70% of Hispanics say hate speech is an act of violence. That's compared to just 40% of whites. So as long as, look, it's great that we're bringing new voters into the party. My message to the Trump campaign would be, don't water down the message. Don't pander, as you say. Don't compromise on your beliefs to try to win over these voters when at the end of the day, they're not the people you need to win. I mean, sure, if you could convince me that this community in this state was key, fine. But to do this national pandering, as we saw in 2020, like the Platinum Plan to black voters, to do that with Hispanics in 2024, not only is going to compromise on the Republican and conservative principles, but it isn't even going to win you the election.
No, I think that's very important for you to point out as well. Eduardo, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining us tonight with your analysis.
Thanks for having me.